I'm right here. I'm just past this point. If I would replace my timing chain, I would introduce that section right here in my engine. I don't want to do that. 64,000 kilometers, that timing chain is going to have another 200,000 kilometers of life in it.
Look at here. Block is all ready to be put together again.
I want to explain which components we replace and which components we keep, toss or replace. The first aspect is, are you doing the job yourself or are you going to have a workshop do it? A service shop rebuilding your engine, they're going to come back to you and say, well, while we in here, it's not that much more, and why don't we put in new pistons, and why don't we put in this, and why don't we put in that? And in this circumstance, yes, you go ahead and you follow the while we in here method and replace everything they suggest. That's what I would recommend, because it's not going to make a big difference. You're already broke, but while we in here is not always the best rule. Think about you say that in the bedroom. And I explain you how I make the decision what we replace and what not. Actually, okay, I prepared a oil change service interval video, but I'm not going to show you guys this. It gets too much bad reputation.
Oh yeah.
We're going to have to
Facebook groups are going to go nuts.
What you need to understand when you replace your components in your engine is what's actually the engine lifespan. Engines from Ford are typically designed to last 150,000 miles. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but it gets them through the warranty period, and they do have to set a certain target. What I want to show you is how the regular lifespan of an engine looks like. This is something you can find in the internet, and it's called the bathtub failure distribution. The reason it's called like this is the failure curve of an engine typically follows this shape of a bathtub. And the way this comes together is out of the failure distributions of the different life cycles. So in the beginning of the life cycle, you have the early infant mortality failure. So those are manufacturing defects and they show up quickly. Think about they install a timing belt which is a little bit torn or cut from the manufacturer. They didn't see it, they install it, the belt will snap, bang. It happens in the beginning. Once those early infant failures are done, you actually reach a constant failure mode, which is sort of a flat line. And this flat line, depending on the quality of the engine, is a little bit higher up or a little bit lower down. On a Toyota, it's like down here, okay? This failure mode is caused by all components in the engine failing randomly over a long period of time. But all those failures do not happen because of direct manufacturing defects. They happen because of process capability issues in the plant. You will get like a very constant distribution resulting in an average amount, let's say per day, per week, per year of the engines delivered. You can spread this out to 500,000 miles. It all depends on the particular engine. But statistically, in general, it will look like that. And towards the end of the life cycle, you have the increasing failure rate again, simply because the engine wears out. And some engines wear out quicker because they've been driven off-road or driven by drivers who don't know what an oil change is, and so on. On a Land Rover, this bathtub failure distribution looks different. It has a curve which is more like this. Okay? This is now in particular for the SDV6. There's no laughing in my video. Now this is my theory, okay? And I might be completely wrong. The crankshaft failing engines do not break in that infant failure rate. They actually run. And they run a certain amount of time. And then the frequency increases. And that's what I'm trying to show here. This very early stage where the vehicle is running, I call that the first and second owner stage. Even in our case, it was a first owner failure, but only because he kept the car too long, okay? With the first owner, I mean people who buy their car, drive it 3 years and then sell it and don't have any trouble with it. And if they have trouble, it's covered under warranty. Our previous owner here, he actually bought the vehicle and he wanted to keep it. Man, he bunkered 8 oil filters in his basement. He was set up to drive this vehicle until he retires. The second period where typically these failures occur is what I call the budget owner. The budget owner bought the vehicle relatively cheap. Relatively cheap means the vehicle lost a big portion of its original value already. Now in the US, this is a big, huge drop and the vehicles get really cheap. So do they in the UK. In the UK, these vehicles for the second or third owner get extraordinary cheap. From my point of view, I don't understand why they're such great vehicles. How can they have such a price drop?
Yeah.
I think it has to do with the steering wheel on the wrong side and driving on the wrong side of the road. I mean, the only time we drive on the wrong side of the road is if we drive with 200 on the Autobahn or if we are completely drunk. Versus in Germany, over here where we at, the budget owner who buys that vehicle relatively cheap, I want to say they range in between 25 and 35,000 euros for the second owner. That's still a lot of money. At the end, you have the remaining owners. We all know there are vehicles out there which run 500,000 kilometers and more. You can see the vehicle price is declining strongly in the beginning, in the first and second owner period, but then it kind of drops only slowly. That's true for Germany. The vehicle holds its value, just like a What Cruiser from Toyota, unless you have basically an engine failure. If we give these periods certain names, I want to call this the protected zone. Already cut into this because you protect it typically by warranty. If you don't do your own oil change like the previous owner did, and then he got basically kicked by Land Rover. They said after he came in with the 64,000 kilometer engine failure, they said, oh no, you did your own oil change, it's your own fault. That's
So watch out, Grenadier owners.
The second period, I call it the death zone. Unfortunately, most budget owners buy their vehicle while it's in the death zone.
Like us.
It's very likely that you experience the crankshaft or the bearing failure, okay? And then the remaining ones, that's the passion zone. It don't really matter what happens in the passion zone. In some cases, it might get tossed and a new one will come in, but it will also be an old one. That's a sum up of the lifespan of a Discovery. And that is driving my decisions on what components to buy and what components not to buy new. This vehicle failed at 64,000 kilometers. We basically just passed the early infant mortality failure rate. And now we're supposed to be in that long, flat section. To me, that means I only need to replace what's either broken or really definitely worn by the design-in lifespan. Let's start, for example, with a very controversial, from my point of view, item. The pistons and, much more important, the piston rings. We're not going to replace the piston rings, and I know that's going to cause a lot of discussions, but here is my theory behind it. First of all, this is a piston I cleaned up. You come real close. It looks absolutely perfect. It looks like
it looks really nice.
It cleaned up the piston crown, it cleaned up the piston skirt, and the piston rings are completely loose.
Oh.
I did have them out, and I cleaned the grooves.
And we know where it has to go when we...
And we know where it was originally.
You broke it.
There was a scare there for a moment because the spring from the oil control ring jumped out. Oh. So you can see the condition of this piston, and based on my graph, I say the lifespan of this piston is just after the early infant mortality failure rate, which means replacing this piston or replacing the rings in my world as they are in perfect conditions will actually not elongate the life of this engine. It will introduce, in my opinion, an additional potential early infant failure possibility. When I install new piston rings, yes, these might be worn in, but the new ones will have to wear in, and that wear, in my opinion, not only takes place at the piston ring, it also takes place in the piston bore, mainly in the honing grooves. I believe new piston rings will introduce a significant peak of wear in the honing. I might be completely wrong, and we're going to get a lot of comments how stupid that idea is, what I just mentioned. I also hope we get a few comments who say, yes, you're right, you shouldn't have changed those rings on such a fresh engine. Bottom line is, we're YouTubers and we have to live with the comments we get. And by the time you watch that video, it's already too late. I'm sorry, the engine is already together. It's so beautiful, okay?
Yes.
How can you glue yourself to the road if something like this exists? That's my theory on the piston rings, why we don't replace them. We are past the early infant mortality lifespan, and we do not want to jump back into that lifespan. Now, connecting rods.
Ooh.
Just as difficult of a decision.
Yeah.
We had one severely damaged connecting rod, which was part of this crank section, okay? It took a hit, and it became oval right here. It's no longer round, and maybe it's even bent. I don't know that. I can't measure that. But I can measure the ovality, and that is 0.04, and it's out of spec according to the workshop manual. I bought 3 connecting rods. Aftermarket from Britpart out of the UK. Took a while for them to get here, because I couldn't find any better quality, and I even called a few people in the UK. You can let me have your comments how easy it would have been to get some better ones, but it's too late. Now, when I inspected those connecting rods yesterday with Vera, we found out that one of the connecting rods is significantly heavier than others.
It's measuring the weight of the rods on my kitchen scale.
Yeah, what's good enough for a cake? It's good enough for a Toyota.
It's certainly good enough for a Land Rover.
So they're supposed to be around 710, and it was 739. Actually, it's 30 gram out. The box was open, so somebody else returned it before, but
send it to Ella Time to the YouTube channel.
Yeah, so this one measured 739, and the reason is it did not even clean up the casting here.
Yeah.
See, there is a burr right here. So if I would install this rod, it would be 30 gram too heavy, and it would actually rub on the crankshaft right here.
And that is why we do not prematurely replace good OEM parts, because you just get crappy aftermarket parts.
Crappy aftermarket is still crappy aftermarket, okay? Now, performance engines in the US, they try to get it within 1 gram. Guys, this is a diesel, okay? It has different specifications. If the OEMs were variating 3 grams and my new one is in the middle, I'm okay. Here, I show you. If I put this on here.
Machined, of course, by Christian.
Yeah. You can see how the rod is now balanced on here. It's balanced on this high spot here and high spot here. So here I measure now the big end with 485. Yeah, 484. And you can see how repeatable it is. I take it out. I put it back on. Oh, see there it's rubbing. That's not good. You don't want to have it rubbing. Okay, see 485. It came right back. So this setup is repeatable. It doesn't help if the total weight is correct, but the crank distribution is off. If you look at the results, the big end weight is fluctuating like 3 grams, which is the same 3 grams we got fluctuating in the total weight. So this goes into our tool collection.
I think we need a new box for our tool collection.
Yeah. See this high spot?
Yeah, it's nice, really cute.
30 grams heavier, and it has a machining defect. So I will try to send that one back. If they take it back, it's okay. If they won't, you will find out who that vendor was. When I inspected the bore of the aftermarket con rods, they actually are on the upper limit of the workshop manual specification. When I inspect the OEM ones, which are in the vehicle, just past the early infant mortality phase, I find out that they already a little bit oval. But they are clearly within spec. We have to make a sketch.
Oh my God. Oh my shit, it's never gonna get done. Okay. Christian, we should have made a picture before so we knew what was on it.
We made a video about it. Are you filming?
Yes.
And you can see this without glare?
I hope so.
Now, isn't that a beautiful sketch of a conrod?
Yeah, even I understand what it's supposed to be.
Now, I drew this in an oval shape. The reason is because the conrod wears out in the working direction. So that's representing our used conrods versus a new conrod. This hole is still round, okay? Everybody understands what I'm talking about. Now, on our used conrods with 64,000 kilometers on it, I have the dimension in the working direction and I have the dimension in the non-working direction. And Vera and I measured this, and these dimensions spec are 66.000 to 66.01. What was it?
3.
This is the spec by Ford. We measured on the conrods in the non-working direction with the means we have 66.000. Basically, those were in spec. And here we measured 66.005. So they are perfect. But unfortunately, one connecting rod is damaged and it opened up in this direction by 20. So it's out of spec. Now, when we measure the one we bought now from Britpart, we get in this direction 66.011. And in this direction, we measure 66.016.
It's out of spec.
So it's out of spec, and this really, really sucks because we're buying a component in the UK and it is off the shelf, not within specification. Now, we got no choice because the one which is broken is 66.020022. It depends how you measure. And that's why we're going to have to install a out-of-spec connecting rod out of the UK from Britpart.
And we bought 3 conrods and they are all out of spec.
It's the best one. Vera is absolutely right. One had the wrong machining and the wrong weight, and the other one was 66.018. So not even anywhere close. So this is not really nice. We're going to install this conrod, and hopefully when we do the plastic gauge check, it comes out to be within spec when it's mounted on the crankshaft. So all I can say is, while we're in here is not the right way to go.
Yeah.
Remember, right now I'm at about $3,000, including a new OEM crankshaft. I need to make these decisions wisely, and I have to explain them to Vera. This is sometimes the biggest amount of work. I had to think really long to come up with an explanation why I'm not ordering 6 new ones and only 3.
Yeah, that was a tough one. I wanted 6 OEM ones.
One of the aftermarket Britpart connecting rods was 0.1 millimeter too long. And it wasn't the one which had that machining error. The piston protrusion of one bank specifies the thickness of your head gasket. You can actually buy 5 different head gasket thicknesses based on these tabs here on the side. So this is a 3 tab, which I guessed will be the right one.
Oh, you already ordered it.
If I would have a difference in one bank of more than 0.1 millimeter in piston protrusion, my bank would be out of spec and I would have to take measures. We're down to using only one new connecting rod.
And remember, $80 one connecting rod and 2 are junk.
Yeah. Next thing I want to cut into are the bolts. You can reuse your mounting bolts from the mains. You can tighten them only 2 more times. That's what the manufacturer specification is. So if you plan on doing a lot of investigation like we did, or plastic gauge check where you have to tighten them over and over, you will need new bolts for the lower end down here. You can't reuse them. Luckily, we had a complete set of bolts from a previous rebuild we did for Fabian, and that allows us now to keep the original bolts what came with this engine and put them in the final stage. So we save about 250 to 300 euros by not having to buy new bolts. And I'm gonna punch mark these with 1 punch, meaning I'm the first guy who tightened them a second time.
Yeah.
Okay. Head bolts. They sold by Dana, which is one of my favorite companies for producing parts. The manual says you have to replace them. So I bought them.
So Victor Renz is Dana.
Well, it's at least labeled Dana. I better take them out and check if they are the correct ones.
Oh my God, now you're gonna do that?
The Conrad bolts. And because I did testing with the Conrads, I closed them up again, I measured the board, and I'm gonna do a plastic gauge check and so on. I'm using them 3 or 4 times in total, so I needed to get new Conrad bolts. Now there are then a number of other bolts which are extremely critical, and they are specified as to be replaced. For example, the flywheel bolts. I bought them OEM from Land Rover. They were surprisingly cheap, like 145 a bolt.
Yeah, in Germany, Land Rover parts are actually not that expensive.
We try to buy all our seals from L-Ring or OEM.
But L-Ring is OEM quality.
L-Ring also sells many of these rubbery seals, like for example here they go into the somewhere up here thingy, 245 a piece, 9 or 10 euros at Land Rover. I spend a lot of time online trying to find OEM quality for aftermarket pricing, and that works with L-Ring.
He's going to put it all in a list, and that list will be available to our Patreons.
Now, for example, this stupid O-ring here is 14 euros, and it's on the intake, and it leaks on every Land Rover. So this is a typical while we in here.
Replace it.
Okay? Then certain parts you destroy during disassembly.
Oh yeah.
Like the crankshaft position sensor ring. Buy it OEM. Don't mess around. If you get an aftermarket one and you put that engine together and later on it gives you a crankshaft sensor fault, you're kind of screwed. Know exactly how to put it on. That will be in a different video.
Oh, I hope you guys know what that is. The oil pump. I want to see the crankshaft seal, please. And I want to say something about it. Yes, because in that crankshaft failing group, our most favorite Facebook group, there was a comment by a guy who should know.
You guys watched our previous video and you saw that we had to take the engine out with the torque converter installed. Now, in this scenario, it's difficult to get the torque converter off. Somebody in the Facebook group said one way to get the torque converter off is by actually loosening the lower end and then raising the crankshaft with the torque converter up. If you try to do that, you're gonna have that crankshaft seal in your way. And here's your flywheel and your torque converter.
And the crankshaft seal is bolted on.
So it's bolted down. I'm almost 250% certain that our German special wrench, what we made in that video, is 1,000 times better of a solution. It took me like 5 minutes to make, and you saw us getting it out without dropping it on my head.
Yep.
In 15 minutes. You always have to ask multiple doctors to get a good diagnosis, okay?
Yeah.
We're replacing typically all seals, even tiny O-rings.
Tiny, tiny, tiny O-ring.
I put this all here.
That is a tiny O-ring.
Yeah. I spend a lot of time going through the engine and finding all these O-rings. This is, for example, air conditioning, and this is air conditioning. They need to be renewed. You put them old ones back in, it's gonna leak. But these here are oil passageways, okay? This is right here in the back of the engine. If that one would be leaking, it would be a problem at the TÜV in Germany, and I couldn't get to it. It would be a body-off job. There are components which are an add-on. This component here.
I hope you guys know what that is.
If you don't know what that is, you're certainly not a qualified LR4 technician. This is the security bracket for the oil sensor mounted in the oil pan. I mean, this is a Deutsch connector, so...
We got that from Sarah and Hugh.
Yeah, look, listen.
Oh, I'm too far away.
Yeah, and look how nice this piece fits. And we put 3 bolts back in. That one is not on or factory, not even in late model vehicles. So you buy that bracket for a couple of euros and you know your oil sensor plug will never kick off.
Yep.
So that's
Check out our video about that.
What we don't see right now is all the crap around the engine. And that's actually where the most while we in here parts are. Timing chains. I'm not gonna replace the timing chain with an unknown part. I'm right here. I'm just past this point. If I would replace my timing chain, I would introduce that section right here in my engine. I don't want to do that. 64,000 kilometers, that timing chain is going to have another 200,000 kilometers of life in it. Turbochargers. If I do not detect a jammed turbocharger at this stage, Hell, I'm not going to replace that turbocharger. I put it back in, both of them, including all valves. And of course I inspect the hoses and lines and crap, but I'm not going to replace them. It would be lethal to replace a functioning turbocharger on an engine which did not develop any chips. That charger is already past its infant mortality failure period. That's my way of thinking. The water pump is easy to replace on an LR4. Why would you want to replace a functioning water pump if you can replace that within an hour and a half, and that is a DIY in 3 hours on this LR4 engine? My rule of thumb is if I'm able to replace the component afterwards, I keep the OEM as long as I want. Here's the O-ring I bought instead of buying a complete new water pump. Okay?
Perfect.
Lifters and the little lifter levers. Basically anything what has to do with your valves. Again, we're right here. We do not see any damage on the cylinder head. I even gonna keep the spark plugs. I'm sorry. The glow plugs, I gonna make sure that they are nicely installed. But if they're functioning, I gonna keep them. And a lot of what I say is not true if you go to a service shop. They have to give you a warranty. They have to be sure that this stuff keeps on working, and they're gonna put in a lot more new components. That's why the DIY mechanic can do that on a significantly lower budget. EGR valves, I'm not gonna replace them. I can replace them afterwards. I got the capability to do that. I got Vera helping me.
Yeah.
Can you come with me?
Oh.
You're absolutely right. And of course it's raining.
Yeah, I don't know when it's ever gonna stop raining. Oh my God.
Here are the cylinder heads. You can already see that I cleaned these surfaces. They cleaned up perfectly, okay? There is still the original machining marks in here, so I did not take any material off. Who knows what?
So he's
Our
rambling.
gutter is
I'm gonna
broken.
show you the rain.
Our rain gutter is leaking there, so it's either clogged up.
Yeah, we should stop YouTube videos and fix our house.
And I'm afraid of heights, so I can't fix that gutter.
Yeah, and he won't let me up because I'm not afraid of heights.
Well, because you get hurt walking in the kitchen. That's pretty much it for our talking video this week. Next week will be a hardcore install, engine assembly,
Hopefully.
cursing and everything, oh my God video like you used to. At that point, we want to thank our Patreons a lot for their support. And
we'll see you next Sunday.
Yeah.
Put it in a frame and we put it in here.
so Vera is referring to my little graphic here over the lifespan from an SDV6. You're going to be able to download this on our Patreon page, and we're going to print it out and put it right here as a poster.
Next to the pretty lady.
To remind ourselves that we are not driving a Toyota.
I got new stickers. That is a really nice one from the Land Rover family out of Brazil. That one is from the Carolina Rover Owners Club. Is an alligator.